Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC 280, Oliveira versus Makhachev. Probably one of the more stacked pay-per-views in recent memory. It's headlined by Oliveira and Makhachev. But, Sterling versus Dillashaw is the co-main as well. And Petrosyan versus Sean O'Malley is the co-main, I guess. A very good fight, one that I did not expect the UFC to make, but one that I'm very much looking forward to. Dariush versus Gamrot should be a pretty high-level grappling affair. Even Chukagian Furo, which I know a lot of people aren't too excited about, I think is going to be a pretty fun fight, a very intriguing matchup as well. And the rest of the prelims and early prelims looking pretty solid as well, so that's definitely a good sign. But very stacked card overall. A lot of fun fights, even deep into the prelims. A lot of good spots here as well. So without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns for UFC 280. And in the next fight, we have Karol Rosa versus Lina Länsberg, and Rosa's the minus 255 favorite, Länsberg's the plus 215 underdog, and we'll start with the dog and Länsberg first. So Länsberg, pretty extensive Muay Thai career. She's had a number of accolades prior to, coming into MMA, but I feel like her fights do play out pretty similarly and are pretty straightforward. Most of her fights are either taking place in the clinch or on the ground, whether she's winning or losing. Länsberg's been able to pull off a few victories, being able to kind of just clinch her way there. But she's also given up a lot of top control time. She's giving up takedowns as well, and that's lost her a ton of fights as well. She's also getting a bit up there in age. It's definitely looked like she's slowing down a bit. Was able to drop Kionzad in her most recent fight, but outside of that, didn't look particularly great. And she is going up against a pretty young fighter in Rosa, who at one point was riding a bit of momentum, did have a bit of steam behind her, but did drop her most recent fight against McMahon. But with Rosa, she is predominantly a striker, someone who is able to move forward and throw volume. And on top of that, she has shown she can mix in some wrestling and grappling. But, you do have to be a little wary of it because it was against Jocelyn Edwards, who is just a horrendous defensive grappler, zero takedown defense or get-ups. And Rosa was largely able to just lay on top of her for 3 rounds. So Rosa, she has shown flashes of it, but, it's hard to say just how good she is there. Definitely seems to prefer striking in most of her fights. But that just brings me to my next point with Rosa is I feel like, personally, I don't rate her as highly as maybe the general public does. I'm not saying she's a bad fighter or anything, but, just looking back at her overall body of work, I feel like, she really hasn't beaten anyone of note. Like, just going back to her last few wins, Betch Correia, a veteran, but, much on the decline, tail end of her career, and I believe that was her retirement fight also. Jocelyn Edwards, as we all know, has absolutely no ground game, and that was just a very lopsided affair. Vanessa Mello, very low-level fighter, no longer with the promotion. And, Laura Procopio, arguably Rosa's best win, but that was a very competitive back-and-forth striking affair, except Procopio is primarily a grappler, so, to go toe-to-toe with her over the course of 3 rounds, not a particularly great look. She's got a loss to McMahon, who honestly, is a solid wrestler, but is also getting a bit up there in age, has been known to have mental lapses in fights, wasn't able to do much in that fight. And then she does have, some losses to Melissa Gatto and Larissa Pacheco on the regionals not too long ago. Again, both fighters have gone on to do stuff. Gatto, obviously, in the UFC as well. And Pacheco's out there crushing cans over at PFL. So overall, not the worst losses, but I just don't think that Karol Rosa is as good as everyone makes her out to be. But I do think she should win this fight. She's going to be the much younger fighter. She's going to be bringing the volume and the pressure and the pace. And Rosa, she is a pretty big physical girl herself. So, I don't know if Länsberg is going to be able to just bully her in the clinch or be able to have too much wrestling or grappling success. At the end of the day, McMahon is an Olympic-level wrestler. And, Rosa still has shown that she needs to maybe shore up the grappling a little bit. Obviously did get stuck on the bottom against McMahon, but, also got submitted by Gatto. Obviously, Gatto's a good submission grappler, but, I do think that Rosa has to polish up her grappling a little bit more because I do feel like just in terms of her stand-up, it's probably going to be able to carry her, at least in this division, a good way. She just needs to round out the rest of her game. But I do think that Rosa should be able to get it done here. I think she'll be able to keep it standing long enough and be able to do enough on the feet here to win a pretty clear decision. And moving along, we have Makhachev versus Malcolm Gordon, and Mokaev is the minus 725 favorite. Gordon is the plus 525 underdog, and we'll start with the big favorite in Mokaev first. So, very hyped prospect, definitely still carrying that price tag of someone who's very hyped. But he does have the tools, I think, to succeed at the UFC level. He's a decent athlete. He's got a pretty well-rounded skill set. He's very reliable to push the grappling. He's got good cardio. The foundation, in my opinion, is there. He just needs a little more seasoning, a little more experience, because we saw in his last fight, he did seem a little lost out there when he wasn't able to just have his way with his opponent. He still did get the win, still was able to rack up a lot of control time. And ultimately, you could argue that it was a very dominant performance because he didn't really get hurt in that fight, didn't really take too much damage, and was able to largely control his opponent. But, overall, I still wasn't all that impressed just because, he wasn't able to get off too much offense of his own, really just relegated to holding his opponent against the cage, putting his weight on him, and kind of just grinding him out, which a win is a win. But I feel that as he accrues more experience, he'll be able to be a little more well-versed in these positions, be able to do a little bit more. And I do feel that as he gets older, he'll probably get a bit physically stronger as well. And it seems like the UFC may have taken note on that fight because it looks like they're giving him another, pretty easy fight here. It looks like they're trying to build him up a little bit more here. They're giving him Malcolm Gordon, who appears to be the community's favorite fade at this point, which I can't completely disagree with. I don't really know what this guy's really all that good at. I guess he's got some power in his hands. He's got some maybe sneaky submissions, but he's very chinny on the feet. The cardio's not great. I haven't really been impressed with what I've seen from him at the UFC level. He's got a couple of fluky wins, but beyond that, not very impressed. Wasn't really impressed with what I saw from him in his UFC footage. He gets put in some very bad positions in terms of the grappling. He gets hurt a lot on the feet. I just don't think that Gordon really is any good. So I really think that Mokaev should come in there and handle business. I think he could just come in here and put the grappling pace on Gordon. Obviously, he's going to have to be a little wary early. Gordon is, I guess, a somewhat potent finisher. But, if he's able to weather the early storm, I think that Mokaev should be able to pull away. He's going to have a massive, I think, cardio advantage over Gordon. Gordon, he was barely hanging on against someone like Francisco Figueiredo in a 3-round fight. So, yeah, I think that Mokaev, if he's able to avoid, some crazy bomb on the feet, or, if his arm doesn't snap, he should be able to win the second and third rounds pretty clearly and win a pretty clear decision here. I think he can get a second and third round finish also. Gordon's someone who I feel tapers off tremendously after that first round and a half, and I think just given the cardio dynamic between the two, I do think that Mokaev should be able to kind of just chip away at him and eventually break him in that second and third round. So the official pick, I'm going to go with Mokaev to win by round 2 submission. And moving along, we have AJ Dobson versus Armen Petrosyan, and Petrosyan's the minus 200 favorite. Dobson's the plus 170 underdog. We'll take a look at Petrosyan first. So with Petrosyan, he is primarily a striker, pretty solid kickboxing. He's got good footwork, good lateral movement, very good kicker, which, is good because this guy's got pretty short reach. But he does a pretty good job of attacking all 3 levels with the kicks. We'll go to the go down low, work the body, and set up the head kick. And he does throw with intent. The takedown defense and ground game from Petrosyan, pretty subpar in my opinion. On the regionals, he did do a pretty good job of, stuffing takedowns, working his way back up, tiring opponents out, but wasn't able to do that against Borralho, who is a pretty solid fighter and is also on this card. But it does seem like against better grapplers, guys who have maybe slightly better cardio. He'll struggle a bit getting off his back or getting up off the cage, because he was doing a pretty good job of tiring opponents out and finishing them. But now that he's taking that step up, it might be a little harder to pull off. That said, though, probably not going to be a massive factor here. I do think this is likely going to be a stand-up affair. And on the feet, I do think that Petrosyan's a pretty legit striker. Went toe-to-toe with Gregory Rodriguez in a very close fight. A lot of people thought he maybe should have lost that fight, but regardless, it was a very competitive affair with the likes of someone like Gregory Rodriguez, who is, I think, kind of established himself as a top 15 fighter at this point. But he's going to be going up against Dobson, who is a contender series guy, much like Petrosyan, but a bit more unproven in my opinion. Someone like Dobson definitely has got some power in his hands. Boxing seems decent, but overall just not very sold on him. I think he's still pretty unproven. There's not that much footage on him, but from what I have seen, not super impressed. He's starching guys on the regionals quick, which you can't take too much from. Once you get that step up in competition, it's not going to come as easy. In his contender series fight, he fought another very low level guy who basically just bum rushed him and eventually got caught, got pounded out. And against Malkoun, Malkoun was able to grind on him the latter 2 rounds, but even in the first round, where in theory he should have had a very significant striking advantage, he wasn't really able to pull away. He did clearly win that first round in the striking, but it wasn't a landslide by any means. He was landing the heavier shots. He was landing a bit cleaner, but even someone like Malkoun, who is, pretty basic on the feet, I think Malkoun was really just throwing the jab and the overhand on Dobson, and was still able to hit him clean a few times. So, Malkoun, who's only given him, a couple of looks, was still able to have decent amount of success. Obviously, the threat of the takedown probably opened up a striking game a little bit more, but still just not a particularly great look. And going up against someone like Petrosyan, who I feel is going to be, much sharper on the feet, who's going to be giving him much more different looks than someone like, Malkoun, someone who's a lot more potent on the feet, much better footwork and movement. I think Petrosyan's going to give Dobson a lot of trouble standing. I think the footwork of Petrosyan's going to give Dobson some issues. I feel like a lot of Dobson's lower level opponents have kind of just stood in his face and traded with him. Petrosyan's not going to do that, I don't think. I think he's going to look to stay on the outside, really work the kicks, and I just think that Petrosyan's got a style that Dobson's not too familiar with at the higher level. Overall, I just feel that Petrosyan's probably a level above Dobson in terms of the striking and the technique. I also think that Petrosyan's just a little more proven at this point. Like, him fighting competitively with Rodriguez gives us a lot more to build off of. Like, we kind of know around what level he's at, in terms of the striking and his overall game. And just in terms of even regional experience, I kind of have to rate Petrosyan's level of competition a little bit more. Whereas with Dobson, while I don't think he's a terrible fighter or anything, I feel like he's only looked decent against some, pretty low-level guys, and I do think that Petrosyan's going to be a big step up in competition. I don't know how Dobson's going to deal with, a striker like Petrosyan, but I feel that Petrosyan, I think he's going to be able to probably freeze Dobson up a little bit on the feet with all the different looks he's going to be giving him, his footwork, his distance management. So I think Petrosyan's going to win this. I think he could probably just pick Dobson apart. I think he can win a very clear decision, may even get the knockout. I don't know how tough this Dobson is, but I do think maybe a head kick is potentially live as well. So official pick, I'm just going to go with Petrosyan to win by decision. And moving right along, we have Abubakar Nurmagomedov versus Gadzhi Omargadzhiev, and Nurmagomedov's the -180 favorite. Omargadzhiev's the +155 underdog. We'll start with the underdog in Omargadzhiev. Omargadzhiev, primarily a wrestler. He's very aggressive there and has had a ton of success just running through guys regionally. Obviously, struggled against Borralho, who I think is a pretty legit fighter. But prior to that, pretty much just getting guys out of there early. I think he's only had one fight go to a decision prior to his UFC career. But most of the time, he's just able to get guys down, get on top of him, and pound him out. I don't think he's some, prolific submission grappler, but he does have some, knee bars and leg locks and heel hooks and stuff he'll go for. He is definitely a very aggressive fighter, someone who will look to get the finish. But overall, I don't know if I'm completely sold on him just yet. Because like I was saying before, he's gotten a ton of early finishes, and it's all been against some relatively unknown guys or guys who are pretty low level as well. And in the Borralho fight, the one fight where he wasn't really able to get off a ton of wrestling and grappling success, he struggled mightily. He didn't really look all that good on the feet. He was shooting some desperate shots, and after that first round where he got reversed, he just didn't have much left in the tank to be able to enact that game plan for the remainder of the fight. And it definitely looked like he was starting to wilt pretty significantly in that second round. Took some serious damage and kind of just won it out in that third round. But Omargadzhiev, he does have a decent skill set. It's just that don't know if I fully trust this guy right now. I would like to see him fight a few more times. Maybe see him go a little deeper into fights before I can confidently pick him and even, put money on him. But he's going up against Abubakar Nurmagomedov, who has been a bit of a meme lately, but the guy's a pretty solid fighter, in my opinion, at least from a technical standpoint. He's actually a pretty good, striker. He's able to mix in the wrestling, but it does look like he prefers to strike most of the time. So definitely one of these, striking Dagestanis. He's racked up quite a bit of experience on the regionals as well. Was definitely very overrated, coming into the UFC, and even more towards like the tail end of his regional run. He was very overrated, but I feel like the market's kind of, corrected on him a little bit. But I guess the big issue with Nurmagomedov is that he's just someone who will have these mental lapses, someone who will, crack under pressure. Because with someone like Nurmagomedov, I feel like he does well when he's fighting his fight, when he's able to dictate the pace, dictate the range and the exchanges on the feet, when he's able to kind of fight where he's comfortable. But in situations where, his opponents are kind of pushing the pace on him, they're making the fight a little chaotic, he can have moments where he'll slip up, like against Pavel Kush. He's looking really good in that first round, was kind of having his way, but, Kush just would not go away, and was eventually able to time him with, I think, like an uppercut and eventually submit him. Bojan Veliskovich, got into a very gritty fight with Nurmagomedov and was able to take him to a draw. And David Zawada, was actually very aggressively attacking submission from bottom and was able to catch Nurmagomedov. So Abubakar, in my opinion, is someone who is a bit of a choker. I think if you're able to put him into a firefight, or if you're able to really make him work in there, he's going to have lapses. And I think that, someone like Omargadzhiev may be able to take advantage. That said, I just am not super convinced with the game of Omargadzhiev just yet. If he's able to put on like a high-level grappling or wrestling performance over the course of 3 rounds, I'd be a little more confident in him. But it does look like if he's not having his way either, he does tend to fall apart a little bit either. So 2 guys who I don't really trust, down the stretch. But as far as a pure pick, I think I got to lean on just the experience of Abubakar a little bit more. I think he's clearly the better striker in this fight. It's just I do have some questions as to how he's going to look when Omargadzhiev's shooting on him. How the takedown defense of Abubakar is going to look. If he's going to choke in there, if he's going to wilt under the wrestling pace and pressure of Omargadzhiev. And something I do want to mention that I briefly touched on earlier, Omargadzhiev is someone who will look to attack those heel hooks and knee bars and such, if they present themselves. And someone like Abubakar has shown that, he's not very good at defending submissions. He can get caught in them. He can get a little careless. And, if Omargadzhiev is able to lock something up, I'm not sure if Abubakar is going to be able to get out of it. But ultimately, I do have to side with Abubakar here. I guess my general take on this fight is that I think the skills are there for Abubakar. I think he's a decent fighter from a technical standpoint. He fights with out of a decent camp. He's fought some decent guys regionally. It's just that, I don't know if you could trust this guy to really hang in there when the going gets tough. I just think that he doesn't really have that dog in him. He's not someone who's going to really fight for your money. If shit gets wild in there, yeah, I don't really trust him. So I'll go with Abubakar, but, I don't know if you could really lay the minus 180 in the spot for him. So, give me Abubakar. I'll take him to win by decision. And next up, we have Magomed Mustafaev versus Yamato Nishikawa, and Mustafaev's the minus 550 favorite. Nishikawa's the plus 400 underdog. And we'll start with the big underdog in Yamato first, who is also going to be making his UFC debut, coming in from the Japanese regional scene. But yeah, with Yamato, he looks like he is a grappler. The striking from him seems a little erratic. It does look like he's got some power and intent behind his shots, but I do feel like his striking overall needs a lot of polishing up. He's kind of hittable on the feet as well, but he does do a decent job of getting the fight to the mat. He definitely seems a lot more comfortable there. He seems to know what he's doing a lot better there. That said, though, I haven't been super impressed with what I've seen. He's pulling guard sometimes. He's giving up top control time in a lot of his fights as well. Looks like he's getting out-muscled in certain spots also, getting held up against the cage. He definitely makes a lot of mistakes in there. And he is a little comfortable off his back sometimes. I've seen him, get stuck there, and he'll just throw up elbows, which, he has been able to hurt some opponents, but that's just not a very long-term viable strategy, especially at the UFC level. But beyond that, I'm just a little skeptical of this kid. I find his record to be a little bloated up. I don't think the competition he's facing in there is particularly great either. I've seen him kind of get bailed out in fights also. There was a fight where I felt like he was on his way to losing. Gets the most egregious doctor stoppage in that fight. I believe it was in the 5th round. His opponent was on top of Yamato, was racking up that control time, was having a lot of success early as well, but ref just peels him off, calls off the fight, and basically hands Yamato the victory there. So some pretty shady stuff going on there. But yeah, overall, while I do think that he's probably got some skills, I just think that he's getting rushed up to the UFC a little too soon. The guy still is very green, very early in his career. And I feel like overall his game does need a lot of polishing up. And, he's not getting an easy fight here in Mustafaev, who, I don't want to call him a veteran of the sport because he's only had, I think, like 3 or 4 UFC fights. But he's kind of been around. He debuted a little while ago. But he's very well-rounded. He fights out of a decent camp. He's got solid striking. He's got a bit of power as well. He likes to throw in those spinning attacks, which makes him a little more unpredictable. But on top of that, he's shown he could wrestle. He could, mix in the takedowns. He's able to hit, 6-7 takedowns in a fight. Still ended up losing that fight, but, he is a very willing grappler. There are some concerns when it comes to the inactivity of Mustafaev. I think he's coming off of near 2-year-long layoff, and beyond that, he's only fought like twice in the past 5 years or so, so very, very inactive. And he's no spring chicken either. He just turned 34, I believe, which isn't particularly old, but when you start to take those long layoffs, you just don't know, what kind of rest he's dealing with, if he's faced any sort of decline during this point. So, just very, very iffy there. But just in terms of, the more proven fighter, having more UFC level fights, fighting better opponents, and having, I'd say, a pretty well-rounded skill set, I do think he's the deserved favorite here, just because we have a lot more to work off of from him. But I definitely wouldn't recommend laying the minus 550. He should win this fight. I think he's the better fighter. He's definitely more proven. He's the one with a full camp here. It's going to be fighting with the crowd behind him. I do think that Mustafaev should win this fight. The line is a little out of hand here, mainly with the layoff concerns and stuff. But I do think he should come in here and handle business. No reason he shouldn't be able to beat a UFC debutant coming in short notice with, I'd say, a somewhat limited skill set at this point. So I'm going to go with Mustafaev. I think I'll go with Mustafaev by decision. This Yamato kid does seem pretty tough. He's pretty gritty in there. Definitely he's got that dog in him, and does seem pretty durable. So I'll go with Mustafaev to be able to mix it up, beat him on the feet and be able to mix in the wrestling and win a pretty pretty dominant decision here. So give me Mustafaev by decision. And next up, we have Zubaira Tukhugov versus Lucas Almeida. And Tukhugov's the minus 155 favorite. Almeida's the plus 135 underdog. And we'll start with Tukhugov first. Just one of these Russian fighters who very well-rounded. The striking is solid. He's coming off of a very solid striking performance against Ramos. Competitive against Dawodu as well. And of course, he's got the wrestling to fall back on. But the problem that I have with Tukhugov is, a couple things actually. One is the inactivity. He's been fighting about once a year these past couple of years. It looks like he's kind of just been relegated to fighting on these Abu Dhabi cards. The other is more important, and that's the cardio concerns with Tukhugov. He's got the wrestling, he's got the striking, he's got the skills, to hang with some of the best guys in the division. It's just that he doesn't quite have the cardio. He's routinely fallen off, later in fights. He doesn't really have the cardio to really push the wrestling aggressively. And he's not particularly great at controlling guys either. So, I feel like his style just doesn't really mesh all that well, right? He's very well-rounded. He's quite skilled everywhere, but he's actually kind of low volume on the feet. So he really does have to mix in the wrestling, to put stamps on rounds, to really swing rounds his way. But he's also a little gassy, and he's not great at controlling opponents. So he really has to walk a pretty fine line in terms of mixing it all together to not gas himself out. And I feel like the performances kind of speak for themselves. The results speak for themselves. He's been to a number of just really close fights that have gone to split decisions. He's not necessarily getting blown out in these fights, but, he's just doing barely enough, in terms of the takedowns and the volume on the feet to keep it competitive, but not really pull away either. So, I feel like that's just a function of him maybe not having the best cardio, not being able to push an insane pace and really, pull away in rounds. But with that being said, though, it is against some pretty stiff competition. So, you can't knock him too much for it. It's against some pretty tough guys like, Moicano and Lerone Murphy and Dawodu. So, pretty legit guys, pretty solid UFC level fighters. But he's going up against Almeida, who, I would still say is a bit unproven, but I do like the style that Almeida brings to the octagon. He's someone who is a very fast starter, pushes a pretty crazy pace right out the gate. Very aggressive. He does have power in his hands. And coming off the Contender Series fight, I just wasn't sure if his style was very sustainable, especially seeing him kind of slow down a bit against Zellhuber, but he did make it work for him in his last fight, did get hurt in that last fight and was able to come back from that. But I still have some reservations just because a lot of his wins have been in that first round, and, he does slow down a bit going into the second and third rounds, but for the most part, he's been able to fight through it pretty well. And even in the Zellhuber fight, he was actually still throwing some volume, still throwing with heat in the second and third rounds. It was just that Zellhuber had a little more left in the tank and was able to out-volume him. But it wasn't like Almeida was just completely dead in the second and third round. So it does seem like Almeida is able to kind of fight through the fatigue. I don't think he's like a horrendous gasser or anything, but he does slow down, especially with the pace he pushes. But taking a look at this fight, he does have a pretty tough fight ahead of him. Tukhugov has got a lot more UFC experience, obviously. He's likely the more well-rounded fighter. On top of that, Tukhugov's going to have the home crowd behind him. So Tukhugov, I think, has got a ton of advantages in this fight. But, I feel like I may be overrating Almeida a little bit after his last performance. But I do think he brings a style that can give Tukhugov some issues. One, Almeida is someone who's going to get in your face. He's going to really push the pace, really pressure opponents. And Tukhugov is someone who I feel like doesn't really react to that sort of pressure and pace too well. Tukhugov kind of seems like a type of fighter that, he prefers to fight at his own pace. He likes to dictate the exchanges. But Almeida, I think, is going to make this a dogfight. And I just don't know how well Tukhugov is really going to do in those situations. Obviously, he's got the wrestling and the takedowns, but he's not great at controlling opponents. I feel like if he's expending too much energy trying to take and hold Almeida down, he'll end up being a little more tired than Almeida is going into that second and third round. So while I do feel this is a decent step up in competition for Almeida, I think that stylistically he'll give Tukhugov a lot of problems. So I'm going to go with Almeida in this spot. I think he could win by early knockout. He's really going to test the chin of Tukhugov in this fight. But I also think that Almeida can win a decision also, just because I think he can hurt Tukhugov. We see Tukhugov maybe try and wrestle to try and draw the fight out a little bit. But I think we see Almeida be able to kind of break away, get back into space, and be able to do enough on the feet to win a decision if it goes there. So I'm going to go with Almeida. Official pick, I think I'll just go with round 1 knockout, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to win a decision either. And next up, we have Nikita Krylov versus Volkan Oezdemir. And Krylov's the minus 175 favorite. Oezdemir's the plus 150 underdog. And this should be a pretty fun fight, but not one I'll be too invested in. Two guys who I think are pretty solid fighters, but overall somewhat unreliable. We'll start with Oezdemir first, who, decent striker. He's got some power as well, although I do feel like it might be a little overrated or overstated at this point, because he did come into the UFC, did get a couple of knockouts over some chinny guys, but hasn't been quite able to replicate that sort of success early in his UFC run. That said, I do still think he's a decent striker. Takedown defense is solid, but I guess the issue with Oezdemir overall is just that he doesn't fight with a ton of urgency in there. He's not someone that will fight for your money. Like, there's a lot of fights, or a lot of Oezdemir fights, where I feel like Oezdemir's kind of just content to coast and fight to a very close decision, whether it's a win or a loss. He doesn't really put a stamp in fights. He's never really out of a fight either, but he never really does that extra little bit to really, help swing rounds in his favor. There's not much wrestling upside either, so, he's kind of reliant on his hands and, him doing enough damage to win rounds that way too. And overall, I kind of feel that Oezdemir is someone who just doesn't really like being hit. Obviously, nobody does, but he is someone who, he will go in there and kind of mitigate damage if it looks like the fight's starting to get out of hand. Like, he won't put it on the line there to win the rounds back and stuff. So, not a terrible fighter by any means, but just not someone I'm super enthused about, ever really taking at this point. And he's going to be going up against Krylov, who is a pretty well-rounded fighter, but a bit of a stunt puller himself. Outside of that, though, he is a pretty good fighter. He could strike. He's got a bit of pop in his shots. He's got the wrestling. He's a very formidable grappler. He just tends to slip up in certain spots, typically against other guys who could grapple. He's usually getting caught in something, but he's probably not going to have to be too worried about this. Oezdemir likely going to just keep it on the feet with him. So, on paper, I feel like this is Krylov's fight to win. He does have the more well-rounded skill set. He's got the measurables advantage as well. He's the slightly younger fighter. He's going to be a little taller and longer as well. In terms of the experience, I'd say they're both at a pretty similar level. But, I do think that what it comes down to is that, Krylov's just going to have the wrestling and the grappling he could go to potentially swing rounds in his favor. But I will say this, Oezdemir does have pretty good takedown defense. I think that if he's able to keep it standing, he probably can win the striking exchanges, if not at least keep it very, very competitive. And for better or worse, Oezdemir is someone who will fight pretty close, whether it's a win or a loss. He's got a number of very close split decision wins over some, other pretty respectable fighters in the division. And Oezdemir, while, I was saying he's not someone who is going to go out there and fight for your money, he's not just going to go out there and roll over either. He's going to put on a decent performance. And when it comes to fighters like this, it does make it difficult to bet them at chalk, but as an underdog, I feel like it's a little more palatable, especially when you have a fighter who is capable of fighting to these really close decisions. So, as far as a pure pick, I think I got to go with Krylov. I like his well-roundedness. I think he's got a few more paths to victory here. I think he's got more opportunities to score, on top of the fact that, he's going to be the younger guy, a little longer in there as well. But I do think that Oezdemir could probably make it competitive, but pure pick, I got to go with Krylov. But as far as a bet goes, I think that Oezdemir is probably the side if you are going to bet someone here. Definitely wouldn't recommend laying the minus 170 on Krylov. But I'll pick him to win. I'll pick him to win by decision. And in the next fight, we have Makhmud Muradov versus Caio Borralho. And Borralho's the minus 200 favorite. Muradov is the plus 170 underdog. We'll start with Muradov, who, not really sure what happened with this guy, but, he's making his return after over a year off. But Muradov, he's a good boxer, decent power, good combination punching, good timing. The takedown defense of his has held up largely. He did get submitted by Meerschaert, but that was more so a club and sub scenario, which not much of a better look either, right? Because it did seem like Muradov came in that fight, didn't really respect the striking of Meerschaert. Was probably looking for a highlight reel knockout, came in extremely hot, looked like he was hunting that early knockout, never materialized, and it looked like he eventually just gassed himself out a bit hunting the finish, and eventually got hit by Meerschaert and submitted. So not a great look, but I do think that Muradov is a decent fighter. Just came into that fight with, pretty poor fight IQ and game planning. But he is going to be going up against someone with a pretty good fight IQ in Borralho, right? A guy who's just been on a tear lately, right? Very well-rounded fighter. Karate style on the feet, good footwork, in and out of the pocket, decent wrestling also, good timing on the level change. He will chain takedowns together. He's got very high-level jiu-jitsu, supposedly trains with Maya, and you can kind of see in his grappling as well, very good positional grappling. He will look for the submissions, but overall, I'd say he's a bit more of a decisionator. He's not going to rush the finish. He's not going to force it or anything. Just looking to really control a fight, right? Looking to, backpack opponents, grind them out. And overall, just showed pretty good, understanding of a fight, good fight IQ, and, good cardio as well. So overall, looking like a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter with not a ton of holes in his game. I will say this, though. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but Borralho's not really a finisher. He doesn't have a ton of urgency to finish fights, which, can be a bit frustrating if you're watching him fight. But at the end of the day, he does get the win. He knows what he needs to do to come out victorious. And, he's not going to put himself at risk to do so, especially when when he knows he's able to win in certain areas and dominate the fight there. So I do like what I've seen from Borralho so far. But it does look like the market's maybe starting to overrate him a little bit. He's coming off of two very solid performances, right? And he's going up against Muradov, who potentially could have the same holes in his game in the grappling, right? I wouldn't be surprised if Borralho was able to take Muradov down, backpack him and just grind him out for 2 out of the 3 rounds, maybe even find the submission. But Muradov, historically has shown pretty good takedown defense, and if he is able to keep this fight standing, he's got, I think, the better striking in this matchup, man. I think he could outbox. Borralho on the feet, and so Borralho's really going to have to get his wrestling and grappling going to have success in this fight, and I do think he should be able to, but it's just a pretty hefty price tag to be laying. I think he's lined similarly to his fight against Petrosyan, which I don't think makes too much sense, because I do feel that Muradov's probably the more proven striker, at least at this point. And, Muradov has actually shown, good takedown defense, whereas with Petrosyan, he has shown he can be taken down. He does give his back and stuff. So I don't know if I agree with this line too much, but I do see a somewhat clear path to victory for both guys. I think that Borralho could definitely get his grappling going and grind out 2 of the 3 rounds. I also can see Muradov maybe being able to keep it standing long enough and be able to win minutes that way, because as we saw with Borralho, he is going to just rack up control time, but, he's not exactly the most aggressive and he doesn't do the most with the control. So if Muradov is able to, work his way back up after being controlled for 2-3 minutes and get his boxing going, in the remaining, 2 minutes or so, I could see him still be able to swing the rounds back. So I don't want to completely write Muradov off here. That said, though, I think I'm still gonna pick Borralho to win here. I do think that Borralho is well-rounded enough that I feel like his striking should be competent enough for him to set up the takedowns and work the grappling. And honestly, after the GM3 performance from Muradov, I am a little skeptical of his cardio, of his fight IQ, and I can kind of see this being similar to the Petrosyan fight, where we see Borralho just get the takedowns early and just bank 2 early rounds with the grappling and the control time, and then just look to kind of survive that third round. So I'm going to go with Borralho in this spot. I'll pick him to win by decision. And closing out the prelims, we have Sean Brady versus Belal Muhammad. And Brady's the minus 150 favorite. Muhammad's the plus 130 underdog. And we'll start with the slight favorite in Sean Brady, who is a pretty legit grappler. His striking, it's coming along. It's serviceable, but he does his best work on the mat. He's very aggressive with the takedowns. He's very heavy on top. He's a very slick submission grappler. He was able to just out-grapple Chiesa. The striking in that performance was a little concerning, but he knew what he had to do to win in there, and he was able to fall back onto that grappling and out-grapple a very high-level guy in Chiesa. So, there were definitely some ups and downs in that performances, but overall, I did like what I saw a little more than what I didn't. And, Brady, he is still a pretty young guy, and I do think that's something he could definitely polish up and maybe set up his wrestling and grappling a little better. But look, I do think that Brady is a very solid fighter, very physical. And I'd say outside of the McGee fight, he's been able to get takedowns at will and, really rack up that control time, even finding submissions along the way. So I do think he's a solid fighter who's pretty damn reliable to push the grappling. Muhammad, on the other hand, very well-rounded guy. I know people have been calling him a wrestler lately just because he's had some pretty dominant wrestling performance in his last 2 fights, but Belal's someone who's shown he can mix it up, in terms of the striking and the wrestling. I think he just goes to whatever will give him the best chance of success. If you watch some of his other fights, he's content to keep it standing. And on the feet, he is quite a serviceable boxer. Belal, one of these guys who I don't quite think is elite anywhere, but he's very well-rounded. He's shown pretty good toughness. He's shown he's competitive pretty much wherever the fight goes. He's shown good cardio also, so just a very solid, reliable fighter who's fought some really good competition in there. Honestly, someone who's, I'd say, pretty underrated throughout his career. But, I guess this matchup really just comes down to if he's going to be able to stuff the takedowns. Belal historically has shown pretty good takedown defense, but it is worth noting that he hasn't fought too many wrestlers. He's actually primarily fought strikers in there. There have been a few good grapplers like Maya that he's been in there with, but that's a Maya that was well past his prime, getting a bit up there in age, and was just never really able to convert on a takedown, and that was a pretty low paced, uneventful fight anyways. But I think this is a pretty compelling matchup in that I think to beat someone like Belal, you're gonna have to be better than him in a particular area, whether it's the grappling and the striking, and then really be able to keep the fight in that area, right? Which I do think that Brady can do. Obviously, it's hard to be super confident about it because this is, I'd say, a decent step up in competition for Brady. And, Belal has shown pretty good takedown defense in general, but I don't think he's quite fought someone as physical and as good of a grappler as Brady. I know he fought Maya, but again, that was well past his prime Maya. And I do feel that at this stage in his career, Brady's just a completely different beast. That being said, though, if Belal is able to keep the standing, if he is able to stuff the takedowns, I do actually favor Belal on the feet. But ultimately, I do favor Brady to be able to control where the fight goes. I think that Brady may be able to get the better of Belal in these grappling exchanges, whether in the clinch or against the cage. I feel that Brady's likely going to be the one to come out ahead. Again, I'm not extremely confident in it because I do think that Belal's a pretty underrated fighter. But between the two, I do think that Brady's the better grappler, and I think that Belal's the slightly better boxer. So, I feel like this is overall a pretty 50-50 matchup. I do have to edge it towards Brady just because I think that he'll have a little more success controlling where the fight goes. I feel like Brady's maybe the more proactive grappler. So I think he's got more opportunities to rack up that control time. That said, though, I feel like this is going to be a very close competitive fight. I think people are maybe sleeping on Belal here a little bit. But as far as a pure pick goes, I feel this is pretty close to a 50-50 fight. So for that reason, I think I'll just go with the slight underdog in Belal here. I think that Belal is going to be able to stuff some takedowns, work his way back up, do some work on the feet, and maybe even hit some takedowns of his own to win these really close rounds. But In any case, I do feel it's a very, very close fight. But official pick, I will go with Belal by decision. And I kind of do like this fight to go the distance as well. Belal, historically, just a massive decisionator, not a ton of power in his hands. Not a massive submission threat either. Definitely not against someone like Brady, who's a legit grappler. And I don't know if Brady's going to be knocking out or submitting Belal either. So I kind of like this fight to go the distance. And if it goes to the cards, I think it's pretty 50-50. But I'll side with Belal here. So give me Belal by decision. And kicking off the main card, we have Katlyn Chookagian versus Manon Fiorot, and Fiorot's the minus 200 favorite. Chookagian's the plus 175 underdog, and honestly, I think this is a pretty interesting fight. I think it's a very compelling matchup between two fighters with pretty similar styles. I know it's probably catching a lot of flack publicly, but this is actually a fight I'm pretty interested in. But like I was saying before, I do think this is a fight where we have two fighters with very similar fighting styles. Fiorot, she's got a few more finishes, but, that's against some very low-level girls. But in terms of what they actually do in the octagon, I think it's very similar, right? Because both fighters do have more of a point fighting style, in my opinion. They kind of like to fight long. They like to fight on the outside. They use their length very well. They do a pretty good job of fighting behind the jab. They use their kicks to maintain distance and stay busy, right? With Fiorot, she kind of likes to throw those side kicks, whereas with Chookagian, she's going to like to throw those teeps up the middle. Again, I think I mentioned this already, but yeah, they fight behind the jab pretty well. They do a good job of just intercepting and countering opponents that are coming in. I'd say the main difference between the two, or rather the main difference is one, I actually think that Chookagian is the more technical fighter in there. I think she's actually far more skilled and polished, which, might not be a popular opinion. I think that Chookagian's actually shown some really good fight IQ and veteran savvy in her fights. Right. Just a quick example, we have the Ribas fight where she did get taken down early, did give up a good amount of control time, but eventually was able to work her way back up. She knew what she needed to do with the remainder of the round. She knew where she was. She ended up picking up the pace and really pouring it on in the latter round to kind of win the round back, which I think showed a pretty good fight IQ. And, Chookagian, she is someone who will, make adjustments and reads in fights. Whereas with Fiorot, I feel like she's just far more basic standing. I feel like, her arsenal is just a little bit more limited compared to someone like Chookagian. But the other major difference between the two is just going to be the physicality. Fiorot, I think, is pretty clearly sauced out of her mind. I don't even think it's debatable at this point. There's really no subtlety to it whatsoever. I feel like she's got all the telltale signs, and honestly, I'm a little surprised she hasn't gotten her own segment on More Plates, More Dates. Regardless, I think the physicality could be a big factor here, especially when it comes to the female divisions. When you have someone who has got, a big like strength and physicality advantage, I think it could even up the playing field when it comes to, the technique and stuff. So potentially, it may be enough for Fiorot here to close the gap in the striking, which I don't think is massive in any case. I just think that Chookagian's, a little more polished in her style. But I guess the thing really making me question Fiorot in the spot is I just don't really know how she's going to look when she's not getting off on her own game. Because in this matchup, she's going to have to come in here, and I think she's going to have to play Chookagian's game, because typically in Fiorot's fight, she's going to be the taller, longer girl. She's usually going to be the one, keeping opponents at distance, countering them when they come in. But I think this dynamic's going to be flipped in this fight. Chookagian's actually going to be the taller, longer girl. I think it's Chookagian who's going to be the one that's, typically fighting her style, whereas with Fiorot, we're going to have to see her, close the distance in this fight. And not to mention, this is going to be the best striker that Fiorot's fought to date. So for those reasons, I don't know how you could make Fiorot a big favorite, let alone a 2-1 favorite. Given the dynamic of this matchup here, I would honestly be a little surprised if Fiorot significantly pulled away in the striking. I think this should be extremely competitive at the worst here. In fact, I'd actually be a little more concerned with the takedown threat of Fiorot. She has shown that she's got some pretty sneaky trips and throws in her arsenal, and she is willing to go to the ground. And Chookagian honestly has looked a little weak there. If if a tiny little Amanda Ribas is able to take Chookagian down and hold her down there for significant periods of time, you can only imagine what a juiced up Firo can do. That said, though, Ribas, I think, is a much higher level grappler than Firo, but Firo is going to have the strength of a teenage boy up in here. So I do think that could make a difference. So, that is something I'm a little more concerned with on the Chookagian side. But, if she is able to keep this fight standing, and this is largely a striking affair, I do think she could keep it very competitive and maybe even outright win these striking exchanges. So, official pick for this fight, I am going to go with Chookagian to pull off the upset. I think that, outside of her just getting repeatedly taken down and held down, I think she could keep it very competitive in the stand-up. I think she could even beat Firo in the stand-up. I think the main thing is you're giving me plus, 170-ish on Chookagian, a much more proven fighter. And you're telling me Firo's going to come in here and she's going to beat Chookagian at her own game at a 2-1 clip. I'm just not really buying it. So I'm going to go with Chookagian here. I'm going to go with Chookagian by decision like she usually does. And next up, we have Beneil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot. And Gamrot's the minus 190 favorite. Dariush is the plus 165 underdog. And we'll start with him first. Decent-sized underdog for a veteran in Dariush. But Dariush, very solid fighter, very well-rounded. Generally looking to grapple, but, I do think his stand-up's quite good. He's got decent power on the feet, sneaky power, actually. He's got a good body and head kick. His defense is a little concerning because sometimes he does kind of float his chin out there, and he has been clocked a few times, gotten knocked out and hurt pretty badly on a number of occasions. Got hurt pretty badly against the likes of Klose, and Dober was able to claw his way back in both of those fights, but it was not without adversity. And on the feet, I do feel that Dariush will leave openings to get hurt pretty badly. Beyond that, he has been knocked out by guys like Hernandez and Barboza, and I do believe he's got an earlier knockout in his career as well. So I do think that, the cracks are there in terms of the striking defense, the chin, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a massive concern here against Gamrot, who is, I'd say, a little pillow-fisted, honestly. The guy's a big-time decisionator. He is, I'd say, very well-rounded also. His striking is decent, but I'd say it's his wrestling that really wins in fights. He's capable of going out there, hitting 6, 7, 8 takedowns. He's been in 5-rounders before. He's coming off of a 5-round performance against Sarukian, but even on the regionals, he's gone 5 rounds. So the cardio's there, the skills are there, the durability's there. Just a very solid, well-rounded fighter, but he is, in my opinion, a little reliant on having to hit these takedowns because I don't think he's a massive power threat on the feet. I don't think he's doing enough on the feet to really win, clear striking decisions. So he'll have to mix in the wrestling to really win fights and swing rounds that way. But Gamrot, he's shown really good takedown defense. Was able to stuff a number of takedowns from Taruki and not really get controlled by him. So great performance there. But what I really liked was just that I think that Gamrot, with his great takedown defense and his wrestling ability, he's really good at controlling when the wrestling and the grappling takes place. But I think what makes this fight so interesting is that he's going up against Dariush, who is a very good grappler in his own right, and someone who does have really good takedown defense and wrestling also. So it'll be very interesting to see who's going to be kind of dictating these grappling exchanges, who's going to be the one having the most success there. And I'm thinking it may be Gamrot just because I feel he's a little more persistent with the grappling. Dariush is pretty reliable to go there too, but he has let fights play out on the feet sometimes. So it's kind of hard to say. Dariush, really good takedown defense, also really proficient grappler. I just have a hard time seeing Gamrot, repeatedly taking Dariush down, controlling him. And on the feet, I kind of favor Dariush. I feel like at least on the feet, he's the more effective striker, whereas with Gamrot, I just haven't seen him have extended success in the striking. Outside of maybe the Holtzman fight, but the Holtzman at that point, I feel like his chin's been cracked by none other than Dariush himself in the previous fight. So on the feet, I do favor Dariush. Gamrot, he was losing the striking exchanges to Sarukian early in the fight, which, while Sarukian is a pretty solid fighter, he's not really known for his striking prowess. He is more of a grappler. So on the feet, I kind of do actually favor Dariush. I favor Gamrot a little more to be able to push the wrestling. I don't know how much success he realistically is going to have, because again, he is going up against Dariush, who is a really good grappler himself. I think he's going to put up a ton of resistance, similar to Tsarukyan, especially early in the fight. And that kind of leads me to the next point. This is going to be a 3-rounder, which I kind of feel like favors Dariush. Gamrot, in my opinion, is a bit of a slow starter. He started a little slow against Tsarukyan, started a little slow against Kutidze. Did get those early finishes against CDF and Holtzman and Stevens, but Holtzman and Stevens, not great fighters at that point in their stage anymore. Like I was saying before, Dariush already knocked Holtzman out in the fight prior. Dariush had already beaten CDF in a pretty competitive, grappling affair of a fight. Shouldn't have been a split decision, honestly. I thought he won that pretty clearly. And Gamrot also gets to fight CDF, except CDF comes in with rib injury this time. Makes easy work of him. But back to my point, I think I was saying Gamrot starts a little slow sometimes. And I think that, him coming off of a 5-round performance may affect him a little bit, honestly. The pacing's a little bit different. We saw him in his UFC debut. He started off a little slow, and I think that, he hadn't quite gotten used to, being in 3-rounders, because his last regional fight since coming to the UFC was, I think, a 5-rounder. And so, his pacing might be a little off. But just in general, outside of his couple of fights where, he got the early finishes, he does tend to kind of concede that first round a little bit and start a little slow. And Dariush, on the other hand, is a bit more of a hot starter. So just based off of that, I feel like we could see Dariush, at least win the first round. But beyond that, in terms of just the stylistics of this fight, I feel like it's just a very competitive fight everywhere. Again, I favor Dariush standing. I like the persistence and the takedowns of Gamrot, but there's no guarantee that he's taking Dariush down and holding him down, and there's no guarantee that Dariush isn't going to have some success with the zone, wrestling and grappling as well. So for those reasons, I feel like it's very 50-50. But as far as a pick, since I do feel it's a very close fight and Dariush is a decent underdog, I might have to go with him here. I feel like where the odds are now is honestly a little disrespectful, because I do think that Dariush is a pretty legit fighter, and unless you're knocking him out, it's hard to really look good against Dariush. So for those reasons, I'm going to go with Dariush here. I'm going to pick him to win. I'm going to go with Dariush to win by decision in this fight. And next up, we have Sean O'Malley versus Petr Yan, and Yan's the -300 favorite. O'Malley's the +250 underdog. Honestly, this is a great fight, not a fight that I thought the UFC would put together this early. I honestly thought they'd probably build O'Malley up a little bit more, especially after his last performance, but it looks like I think they're ready for him to take that step up. But it's a great matchup. It should be a fun one between two pretty high-level strikers. Obviously, Yan going to be the much more established fighter, the much more proven striker in this matchup. Yan arguably the best striker in the division. Going into the Sandhagen fight, I thought that Sandhagen would give Yan a run for his money there, but Yan was able to beat Sandhagen pretty decisively. Super technical. Fights very composed. He's someone who will make adjustments and reads into fights and start to build off of it, and is someone who will kind of look better, as the fight goes deeper into each round. Yan is someone who will throw with intent, and he's got some vicious ground and pound in there. The guy's looking to hurt opponents, basically. So I like his aggressiveness. I like the intent he throws with. And on top of that, the guy's just a very, very skilled fighter. And I guess really the only criticism of Yan's game so far is just the fact that, he can start off a little slow in fights, and, he can be a bit low volume at times, but I feel like he's kind of dispelled that a little bit, at least the volume part. I think when he's matched up with a fighter who's willing to stand and trade with him, he'll have the volume, but, against more counter-heavy strikers, it'll be a little lower, but he's been able to make it work so far, and Yan is someone who I feel does switch it up between fights. He is someone who will kind of cater his style a little bit, depending on the fighter. And on top of that, Yan's got pretty solid cardio. The durability checks out also, so really not too many bad things to say about Yan. And, He's going to be going up against O'Malley, who is a pretty legit striker himself. He moves well, very dynamic striking, very flashy, but definitely not as proven as someone like Jan. The big knock on O'Malley has consistently been that he's getting a ton of very favorable matchups. He's getting guys that, he should really be beating in there. And at times he has taken that step up. He's looked very unimpressive. The fight against Vera obviously ended very early. Gets a pretty fluky knockout there, if I'm being honest. I don't know if that's something that's very replicable. Would be interested to see. Jan is probably going to be targeting that leg for sure. But even in the Pedro Munoz fight, another fight where he did get that step up in competition, just looked very flat in that performance, looked a little timid in there, was a little gun shy, honestly. Munoz didn't look particularly great either, but that was supposed to be a somewhat favorable matchup for O'Malley despite the step up. It's supposed to be a good test to see if O'Malley really belongs in the top 10, top 5 of the division, and I feel like he didn't really pass that test. And now, they're giving him this matchup as if he did, which is a little perplexing to me. The Munoz fight was a big step up from these guys like, Wineland and Chris Moutinho. And even from someone like Munoz to Jan, that's even a bigger step up in competition. So, this is going to be a pretty tough fight for O'Malley just on the basis of, we don't really know what his ceiling really is. Whereas with Jan, I think it's pretty well established by the community and by, his peers that he's probably the best striker in the division. And that's just in regards to some of the unknowns we have for this fight. But some of the things we do know in this fight is that, O'Malley has struggled with injuries. He's gotten hurt across multiple fights. And Jan is someone who will look to target those weaknesses. The guy is just ruthless in there, if I'm being honest. He's going to look to kick at those legs, really test O'Malley there. He's going to dig to the body. He's just going to be the much harder hitter, in my opinion. He's going to be the fighter that's probably pressuring. And O'Malley just hasn't quite shown he could operate at that level just yet. So I do think that Jan is the rightful favorite here. And even beyond just like the technique and the experience and the fact that Jan's a little more proven, I feel that between the two, Jan's just going to be the tougher, grittier guy. I trust him a little bit more when the going gets tough. I mean, on one side, we have a guy who's a stone-cold Russian killer, and on the other, we have a guy with clown hair. So I feel like the pick is pretty clear here. And on top of that, we just have such a stark level of competition difference between the two. Jan's shown he's beaten high-level guys like Sandhagen and Aldo, and was beating Sterling pretty badly in that first fight. Does have legit wins over veterans in Rivera and Dodson, and even D'Andrade. While O'Malley's out here, crushing cans like, Chris Moutinho and Eddie Wineland, and having a staring contest with Pedro Munoz, I just don't know how you could really get to O'Malley in the spot here. I do think that Jan is clearly the side, but now that I've kind of made my case for Jan here, I'm going to say this about O'Malley though, right? One, I do feel the line is a little wide. I do think this is largely going to be a striking affair, and while I do favor Jan to win these striking exchanges, I wouldn't say it's impossible for O'Malley to win, 2 of the 3 rounds. Like I was saying before, Jan is a somewhat slow starter. He has had a tendency of dropping that first round, really taking that first round to kind of make his reads. It's happened in the Sterling fight. It happened in the Sandhagen fight. It's happened a few other times before, but Jan historically pretty slow starter, and in a 3-round fight, that is a pretty dicey proposition. If you're going to give up that first round to O'Malley, I wouldn't be, completely outside the realm of possibility for O'Malley to somehow, sneak a second round in there. Obviously, this is going to be in Abu Dhabi. There's probably going to be a bit of bias, but I wouldn't completely count O'Malley out in this spot. And something to say about the O'Malley side as well is just, I think the pressure may be potentially off O'Malley. Historically, he's come in as a massive favorite in, I'd say, pretty much all of his fights, and so it's a lot of pressure for him to win, and not just win, but to win pretty dominantly, to get that highlight reel KO, especially against these low-level guys. So I feel like there's a bit of pressure to perform on the O'Malley end, but I think in this fight, a lot of that is taken away. Obviously when he's a massive underdog here, nobody's really expecting him to win. So, he can come in here, I think, maybe being a little more loose than how he approached that Munoz fight. He came in as a pretty big favorite against Munoz, and that may have affected him a little bit, going into a fight against a pretty high-level guy. People are expecting you to kind of style on him, which a little unrealistic, but I think it led to him maybe being a little more conservative in that fight. And Munoz wasn't really fighting his typical style either, so it led to a very weird fight. But going into this one, I think he might let his hands go a little bit more. I just feel that potentially, O'Malley's just got a little less to lose in this fight. He's not risking his undefeated record or anything. He's coming into this fight against arguably the best striker in the division. No one's really expecting him to win. So I feel like he could come in here and kind of surprise people a little bit, put it all a bit more on the line, be a little more aggressive than he was against Munoz, and be able to just take maybe a few more risks in this fight. And, with the potential of Yan, starting a little slow and O'Malley maybe upping the intensity a little bit later in the fight, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if O'Malley was able to somehow steal one of the latter two rounds. So I'm not going to completely write O'Malley off here, but I think the logical choice here is Yan, just the far more technical striker, the tougher guy. He's also going to be fighting in Abu Dhabi, which, if it's going to be a close decision, I think they're going to end up giving it to Yan in this spot here. So official pick, I'm going to go with Yan here. The line is definitely wide, though, especially in a fight where I do expect it to largely take place standing, but it's kind of hard for me to see O'Malley, winning 2 of the 3 rounds when someone like Sandhagen, who's I'd say far more proven, was only able to take 1 round off of Yan. But those were some pretty close rounds. But yeah, I got to go with Yan in this spot here. I think he gets it done by decision. And in the co-main event, we have Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw, and Sterling's the -175 favorite. Dillashaw's the +150 underdog. And we'll start with the challenger in Dillashaw first. So Dillashaw, very well-rounded veteran, someone who came in as a wrestler, but has really developed their striking, very unorthodox movement and footwork on the feet, lots of feints, very heavy leg kicks. He's got a bit of power in his hands. He's good on the counter. And, of course, he's got the wrestling he can mix in. He's got the cardio to back it up, obviously. The main concern really is going to be the age and the layoff for Dillashaw. And that was a concern going into the Sandhagen fight. He did look good that fight, even got the W, even though, a little controversial. But, all things considered, he looked pretty good in that fight. But this is another long layoff for him and another injury he's coming back from. And, this time it's going to be up against Sterling, who I think is going to be able to put up a lot more resistance in terms of the grappling than Sandhagen did. And coming off of a knee injury at this stage in his career, you do have to wonder how good the wrestling is going to be from Dillashaw, how good his movement is going to be, how much that's going to affect him. And, Dillashaw is getting a little up there in age. He's 36, which isn't really that old, especially with how he's looked, but that is getting pretty close to the danger zone in terms of, when fighters start to fall off. And coming off of the injury, it just does not give me the most confidence. And he is going up against Sterling, who is kind of similar to Dillashaw in terms of his development and growth in the sport, right? Sterling, someone who came in as a very grapple-heavy fighter, but has really improved their striking, has taken a very just loose and unorthodox striking approach. Sterling, someone who's going to look to throw a lot of volume on the feet, push at a pretty crazy pace. I can't say he's got the best technique or, even has like the most behind his shots, right? Because I do feel like a lot of his volume's kind of empty. But he does give his opponents a lot of looks, and he is generally looking to mix in the wrestling and the grappling as well. He's got a great back take. He's very slick with the submissions. But skill for skill, I think both guys are on a pretty similar level, honestly. I think that if we're talking about their prime, I kind of actually favor Dillashaw. I think he's probably the better striker, arguably the better wrestler also. But, not by like a massive margin or anything. Sterling's a very good wrestler and grappler as well. And I've probably been saying this a lot throughout the podcast, but I feel like this is another very, very close matchup. I think that this fight is pretty competitive wherever it goes. Both guys very well-rounded, good enough strikers on the feet, very good wrestling and grappling. Both have, pretty good cardio. But ultimately, I think what really pushes this fight in favor of Sterling, I think, is going to have to be the age and the injury factors in this fight. I just think that Sterling's going to be the much fresher fighter coming into this. You just don't really know how Dillashaw is going to look, post knee surgery after another long layoff. And I feel if you're betting Aljamain in the spot, you're kind of buying into that narrative a little bit that Dillashaw is probably going to come into this fight a bit more diminished than we've seen him even in the Sandhagen fight. Again, I know he looked good in that fight, but you just never know after another year and a half off, another injury. So while on paper this should be a very close fight, stylistically, I do think that you kind of have to buy into the narrative a little bit, because on one side you have a guy who's 36 years old, has been pretty inactive, who's also coming off an injury, as opposed to Sterling, who is been a little more active, likely a little closer to his prime, probably the tail end of it. So for those reasons, I do have to side with Sterling in this spot. Although I will say this about Sterling, I am still a little skeptical of Sterling in 5-rounders. I know his cardio has largely checked out, but it's really, I'd say, the pace that he pushes in these fights. Like, he's fighting these 5-rounders like they're 3-rounders. He starts out pretty aggressive, pretty hot in both of his 5-rounders against Yan. He started out, pretty aggressively, was throwing a ton of volume, standing, was aggressively looking for takedowns and back takes. And in one of the fights, it worked for him. The other, it did not. So I do have some concerns with Sterling and how he fights in 5-rounders, because it is a little risky, right? Because you do have to win those first 3 rounds if you're going to push that sort of pace. Otherwise, a couple things. You'll leave openings to potentially getting finished later in the fight with how hard of a pace you're putting, not leaving enough gas in the tank. And if you're not winning, those 3 rounds, if you drop one of those rounds and you drop the last 2 as well, then, you're kind of screwed. So I do have some concerns with the style that, or the pace that, Sterling fights at in these 5-rounders. But ultimately, I still think I'm going to pick him to win. I have my concerns, but I do think he gets it done at the end of the day. I think he gets it done likely by decision. I don't think that Sterling's a massive knockout threat. I'm not sure if he's a massive, I guess he is a submission threat, but I do think that Dillashaw should be good enough defensively on the mat to fend off the submission attempts. So official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Sterling by decision. And in the main event, we have Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. Makhachev is the -180 favorite. Oliveira is the +155 underdog. And this is a great fight, honestly. I'd say this is probably a better fight than Khabib Ferguson. Much more compelling, in my opinion. That said, though, I feel like a lot of people have an idea of how this dynamic's going to play out between the two. So I'm not sure if I'm going to say anything groundbreaking with this breakdown here. But here's my take, anyways. So I'll start with Makhachev, the challenger, I guess. But Makhachev, obviously, we know the deal. The guy's a prolific wrestler, a longtime training partner, and a protege of Khabib, the uncrowned champ in a lot of people's eyes. But with Makhachev, the striking is decent. It's very meat and potatoes, but serviceable. Overall, a very risk-averse style on the feet, and in general, too, I'd say, right? Makhachev just not someone who's a very big risk taker. He's generally just looking to control the pace of the fight, just controlling opponents, where the fight will take place. Just really looking to limit the damage he's taking, limit the offense of his opponents, look to take him down, control him, soften him up a bit with the ground and pound, and eventually look for the finish as his opponent starts to slow down. The cardio of Makhachev checks out. He's able to push the wrestling and the grappling pretty aggressively in 3-round fights and even in 5-rounders. The chin is a bit of a question mark. I'd say I wouldn't go and say he's chinny or anything. He's only gotten that 1 knockout loss. And so I don't know if you could take too much from it. So overall, I feel like his chin's still a bit of an unknown, and it'll be interesting to see, how it holds up here, because I do think it's going to get tested a bit here against Oliveira, a very dangerous striker. And Oliveira, he is very explosive on the feet. He is someone who will kind of lay it on the line. He's kind of the opposite of Makhachev in that He will take a ton of risks. He will leave a lot of openings. And he doesn't really, pace himself that well either. He's very aggressive early. He's going to look for the finish, which, in my opinion, is made his UFC run even more impressive, right? You don't see too many UFC champs that kind of put themselves through the fire like that. I'd say most champs, outside of maybe Yuri, tend to be a little more risk averse. They tend to be a little more defensive. But Oliveira is pretty much all offense. He's going to go in there and kind of push the pace. He's going to be creating a lot of chaos in there. Just a complete juggernaut on offense, honestly. Very heavy-handed. He's going to look to, just spam those knees in the clinch. He'll throw the teeps. So just very good attritional work from him. He's going to throw jump knees and stuff, spinning attacks. Basically just some pretty low percentage moves standing, but, he's not afraid to, get taken down because he's got amazing jiu-jitsu. He's very slick on the mat. Very dangerous there. He's very comfortable off his back. That said, though, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Obviously, you can hunt the submissions there, but if those don't materialize, you're going to be giving up a very dominant position to a very good control grappler in Makhachev. But taking a look at this matchup, I think it's a very interesting one because I think that both guys have a style that can give the other troubles, right? Because if you think about it, if you're going to build a fighter to beat Makhachev, I do think that Oliveira is a good prototype. Not the best, I'd look for someone who's got, great takedown defense, great cardio, and good striking to beat Makhachev. But I do think that, Oliveira's got the tools to do it as well. You're looking for someone who's, very dangerous on the feet, very dangerous on the mat, just someone who's capable of getting that finish at any point in the fight. And Oliveira, he is a finisher through and through, a very potent one at that. So I do feel that someone like Oliveira, he's going to have his opportunities to get the finish against Makhachev. But on the other hand, you have Makhachev, who I think can give a lot of issues to Oliveira as well. Because one way to really control the chaos is just to have really, really good grappling, really good wrestling. And I do feel that someone at Makhachev's level should be able to be aware of the submission attempts, be very cognizant of, what's coming his way on the mat, and kind of just stay out of those while controlling his opponent, kind of just draining the cardio as he's doing so. So I do think that someone like Makhachev can give Oliveira troubles, the control, the pressure and pace that he puts on with the wrestling and the grappling and the cardio, which I feel like is ultimately going to be the deciding factor here, because I feel that between the two, Makhachev's gonna have the cardio to withstand that early storm and be able to come out ahead after that second and third round in terms of having more in the tank. And I think that's what it's going to come down to for him. He's going to have a little more left in the tank, and as we all know, Oliveira is someone who can wilt a bit later in fights. I know he's kind of overcome that a bit in his last few fights, but he hasn't really been dragged in the deep waters recently. He has had some pretty crazy comeback finishes, but this is a completely different stylistic matchup. Makhachev he's kind of built for these 5-rounders where he's able to really wear on you and break you down later in a fight. And against someone like Oliveira, who does push a pace, I feel like it kind of plays into the game of Makhachev a little bit here. It's just going to make it easier for Makhachev to eventually find that finish later in the fight. But early, Oliveira is going to be extremely dangerous, as he always is. But I'm going to pick Makhachev here to weather the storm. I think that Makhachev is going to be able to stay defensive on the feet, avoid the big shots, avoid the submissions on the ground, really push the wrestling, and just look to wear on the cardio of Oliveira and eventually pound him out later in the fight. We've seen Oliveira struggle a bit before off his back. He doesn't have the best takedown defense. In fact, he sometimes welcomes these grappling exchanges, but I just feel that someone on Makhachev's caliber should be able to avoid these sneaky submissions, because it's not like a death sentence if you go to the ground with Oliveira, especially when he's off his back, right? Because a number of Oliveira's submissions are actually just club and sub situations where, he hurts them and he's able to jump on their neck or snatch a big guillotine or something. Historically, Oliveira is just not someone who's going to attack triangles and arm bars off his back. So, he's going to be dangerous on the mat, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that if he gets taken down, or if Makhachev takes him down, that Makhachev is going to get submitted or something. And historically, I'd say that Oliveira has actually struggled with guys who can take him down and guys who can get on top of him, right? he's been on a nice little run, but it's been against largely strikers. The last time we saw a wrestler have success against him was actually was Kevin Lee. Obviously Kevin Lee known for being a bit of a gasser, someone who will fall off, but Kevin Lee was having success taking Oliveira down, controlling him. And even before that, Paul Felder, Ricardo Lamas, and even Pettis were having some success on the mat against Oliveira. So the holes are there. He can be taken down, he can be controlled, and he can give up dominant positions as well. On top of the fact that Oliveira doesn't really leave himself a ton of outs with how insane of a pace he pushes those early rounds. So I think this is Makhachev's fight. Pretty straightforward, but I do think he's able to weather that early storm. It could get a little dicey early. He may get hurt. He may even get put in a pretty deep submission attempt early in the fight, but I think he fights himself out of it. And I see him taking over later in the fight. So I'm going to go with Makhachev to win. I think he gets it done by round 4 knockout. I think we just see Oliveira kind of deplete himself, and we eventually see the cardio and the pressure wrestling of Makhachev take over. So I'm going to go with Makhachev to win by round 4 TKO. I do kind of like the unders in this fight, although it's probably going to be pretty heavily juiced. I just have a hard time seeing an Oliveira fight go the distance. The way he fights, he's kind of a kill or be killed fighter. Been doing a lot of killing lately, but I think we see him on the receiving end of it this time. So give me Makhachev by round 4 TKO. And that'll do it for the breakdowns. So we'll go right into the recap for the previous event. Pretty solid card, honestly. A lot of fun fights, a lot of finishes. So it ended up being a pretty fun card. Overall, pretty solid night for me in general. But let's dive right into the recap here. So kicking off the card, we had Mike Jackson, Pete Rodriguez. Didn't really have any sort of action on this fight. Just not a UFC level fight in my opinion. So was just content to sit back and watch this. I don't think anyone was really surprised with the outcome here. Rodriguez made pretty quick work of Jackson getting the early knockout and, getting those follow-up shots in as well. Tatsuro Taira versus CJ Vergara ended up parlaying Taira small and playing his subline for a little bit too. I felt it was a little off. Taira is a pretty proficient grappler, and, he is someone who will go for the submission attempts. It didn't convert in his debut, but that Candelario guy was very slippery, did a very good job of defending submission attempts. But I felt that, Taira, he's a good enough grappler and aggressive enough there that there will be opportunities, and he was able to pull off a very slick submission. Generally looked pretty good in this fight. The only thing I will say about Taira is, I would like to see him maybe work on his stand-up a little bit more, or at least get a little more comfortable there, because it did look like he was shooting some pretty desperate shots in there. And, against lower-level guys, you can kind of get away with, but against better guys, they're going to punish you a little more for that. So, maybe not be as desperate on the attempts, because his striking is actually decent. So, I would like to see him maybe be a little more confident in his hands. But moving along, Pira Rodriguez, Sam Hughes. I had a small half-unit shot on Hughes here. Obviously wasn't that confident, which is why it was only like a half-unit shot. I felt that she would win that last round. Pretty high clip. It just come down to that second round, which could have been the swing round, but I felt Rodriguez did enough there to win the fight. Maybe if Hughes had pushed the pace a little more earlier, she'd have a little more success, would be able to come on a little earlier in that second round. But, pretty solid performance by both fighters. Not too much else to say there. Joe Anderson Brito, Lucas Alexander, didn't get a ton of tape in for this fight until kind of late in the week. The money line was a little wide, but from what I did see from this Alexander guy, he does get taken down a decent amount on the regional scene. And, Brito is someone who will push the grappling. Obviously, he is live for the knockout standing, but I felt like that probably would have been the submissions, the takedowns would have been the path of least resistance, especially against someone coming in short noticed. So, just took a small shot there. Was glad it panned out. Nick Maximov, Jacob Malkoon. And this was honestly a pretty sweaty fight for me. I did end up betting the Maximov line just because I think he dropped all the way down to like minus 130 or so. Had to take a shot there. But mainly I went pretty heavy on the over in this fight. Had it anchored in a couple of parlays so that that early Maximov knee injury really had me sweating the rest of the fight. Thank God Malkoun's not really a finisher. No killer instinct whatsoever. Thank God the corner and the ref and the doctor let let Maximov be a warrior out there and just got it out for 3 rounds, even though the guy was clearly hurt. I mean, just a terrible poker face from Maximov too. Like, the guy looked like he was about to start crying in there. But anyways, glad this fight ended up going the distance. I'm okay with the Maximov money line, play not cashing as long as the overs cashed. But moving along, Mano Martinez, Brandon Davis. I took a small shot on Martinez by knockout. I thought that if Davis's chin is diminished at any point, or if he's slowing down at all, that someone like Martinez would be able to find the knockout. And I don't know if he really ever came close. It looked like there were some moments where he was able to flurry Davis, but I don't know if Davis was actually ever hurt there. So probably not a great bet, but kind of cooling off on Martinez even more. Just a ton of very subpar performances. I don't think this was really one to write home about either. I know Davis is kind of a vet, but still just haven't been impressed with Martinez too much, if I'm being honest. But moving along, Misha Shirkinov, Alonzo Manyfield. So I ended up betting Shirkinov. I bet his round 1 prop, bet his submission prop as well. But obviously that didn't cash. Shirkinov wasn't even close to getting that fight to the ground. He looked scared in there, honestly. And I feel that when you fight scared, obviously it's never a good thing, but I feel like it makes it easier for you to get knocked out. Anyways, didn't cash those bets, but I did take the under in this fight, just in case. Did not see this fight go in the distance at all, and Shirkinov getting knocked out. Lost his bets, but cashed the under. So we move on. Rafael Assunção, Victor Henry. Pretty bad bet here. I ended up parlaying Henry. Obviously, he just wasn't really able to get off a ton of offense against Assunção. Very tricky veteran fighter. Was able to mix in some of the grappling also, and was able to win. Pretty clear decision, in my opinion. Solid win for Assunção. Honestly, I'd kind of written him off in this fight. I didn't think his chin would hold up. I thought he was a wash fighter, and proved me wrong here. So we move along. Jordan Wright, Dusko Todorovic. I think I ended up parlaying Todorovic small. I think I parlayed him small with Tyra. Honestly, it was just more so a fade on Jordan Wright here. He did look good in that first round. Was able to get some top time on Todorovic. Was doing some damage, but in typical Jordan Wright fashion, just kind of fell apart after that first round. Did eat a ton of shots, man. Pretty impressed with how much damage he was able to take. Kind of seemed like he might have been trying to prove a point in there. Might have heard everyone talking trash about him. So kind of just hung in there a little longer than I'd expected. Shout out to anyone who played the over 1.5 in that fight. But anyways, we'll move along. Cub Swanson versus Jonathan Martinez. I ended up playing the under in this fight. Also took a small shot on Martinez to win in round 1 and Martinez to win by knockout. Obviously, the round 1 prop didn't cash, but he did win by knockout. The under cashed as well. Swanson just a killer be killed fighter, right? Even without the weight cut, Swanson's someone who's going to go in there and be aggressive. He's going to look for the finish. And he does leave openings to get finished as well. And then on top of the fact that he is going to be cutting down, I thought he'd be a little diminished, which, he didn't look too bad. He still looked like he's got the speed in there, the power still there. But even without being diminished by a weight cut, I still felt that the leg kicks were going to be there. The surgically repaired knees are not getting any better at this age. Was honestly a little surprised that Martinez didn't go for those a little earlier. We saw Pineda have a ton of success with it early in the fight. We saw Cub reacting really badly to him, and as soon as I saw that first leg kick land from Martinez, I knew it was over because, just the way Cub kind of grimaced with the kick, the way he kind of spun around, I knew he was going to get kicked with a few more of those, and it was going to be over. So that ended up cashing, which left us with one last bet, and that was in the main event. On Alexa Grasso, just pretty solid performance from her overall. The cardio and the output definitely looked like it started to dip a bit in the 4th and 5th rounds, but it still was enough for her to get the job done. It was pretty competitive early, but it ended up just being the volume and the output and the cardio that got it done for Grasso. And overall, just a pretty solid performance from her, pretty solid card. But that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Hope we could carry a bit of this momentum into a pay-per-view card, which I've honestly historically kind of struggled with lately, at least. But hoping to carry a bit of that momentum in. Hopefully you guys found some of this information useful. Best of luck with some of your guys' bets and picks, and I'll catch you guys next week for the UFC Fight Night card, Kattar versus Allen.